Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Desire Dilemma, a podcast that amplifies immigrant voices in America. I'm Funmi Apantaku-Onayemi, your host. I welcome Dr. Tiwa Ajibewa, Assistant Professor of Preventive Medicine at Chicago's esteemed Northwestern University. Dr. Ajibewa came to America with his parents and siblings when he was about 4 years old. Unlike many immigrants, he was spared the harsh reality of migrating to a new country because of the community his parents embraced. It was a community of mixed cultures where people of various backgrounds came together to support one another. However, one major challenge shook his family and became the premise for his commitment to preventive medicine and his life's work. Good morning, Dr. Ajibewa, and thank you so much for joining us on Desire Dilemma this morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
Well, we met at the Africans in the Diaspora event. That was the United African Organization in Chicago. From everything you're doing so much in the community, but you're also doing so much at Northwestern in terms of the research that you do. So I'm very interested today in talking about what you do to benefit our community. But beyond that, it's not just for our community. You've also reached out to African-American communities, just the Black community in general in Chicago. But more beyond that too, you're doing so much just for mankind, not just the Black population, but all populations. So before I get there though, I always like to get that background, what got you there. The first beautiful thing is that you left Nigeria when you were too young to even realize what you were leaving behind, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so my family and I immigrated to the U.S. When I was in preschool. So I was about 4 years old or so, just a little after my 4th birthday. And I was born in Ibadan, Oyo State, Nigeria. And we came here. Funny enough, we came to probably the coldest state in the whole U.S., and that was Minnesota. So I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it was an experience, but definitely grateful for just family and the community and everyone that was impactful in my adolescence and young adulthood.
So even though you left at age 4, what do you remember?
Yeah, so I think, when we chatted a little bit about this, I don't remember too much, but I do remember a couple things. The first of which was that, I would go to school. So I was at a school at the time. I was actually going to school at 3 years old. And I asked my mom yesterday about the name of the school, and she was telling me that it was called Nickdale School. I think it's like private school or something in Ibadan. And I just remember my uncle he would walk me to school all the time. And so my grandmother would tell us, we should go to school, come back, don't waste any time, But my uncle would always walk me to school, and then we would buy sugar cane on our way back. I just remember that memory of the sweetness of sugar cane and just walking with my uncle. And so that was one memory. And then the other memory I would say is being in the classroom setting. So my friends always, give me a hard time when I tell them that I was actually in school in Nigeria and doing simple math, right? I was doing 1 + 1, 2 + 2, very simple math, but I was in school. And so the challenge with the school was back then, I don't know if it's still the same way now, but we would get quizzed on different things that we were learning. And there was just this thing in the back of my head about being fearful or scared that I would get the incorrect answer when the teacher would ask me the answer for something. Because back then, you would get disciplined if you got the wrong answer. But I just, it was formative though, in the sense that just remembering being in school and then coming to the States, not being able to go to school because I was too young, and then later going to Head Start and then elementary school and things like that.
Yeah, there's something about the Nigerian preparation in those, in those, I mean, not, I would say in my day, and obviously now with yours, before you came, that they just, you're so grilled and you are so disciplined and everything is so strict about schooling. So it's not any surprise to it shouldn't be any surprise to anyone that we now see a lot of Nigerians doing very, very well in this country. But then getting to the point in which we can say you are really doing so much, such good work out of Northwestern University in Chicago, which, as you know, is there, in my opinion, premier university in Chicago. Would you say?
I mean, I'm biased in the sense that I worked there and was trained there, so I
Feel
would
free.
say so as well. I mean, I
Free
would say
feel
so,
free.
but there's lots of great universities in the city,
Of
but
course,
yeah, I
of
would
course.
say Northwestern is one of the top ones. And
Definitely.
it's funny you were talking about education. I do think within the Nigerian culture and just generally, I think there's a high emphasis on education. And like you said, it makes sense that a lot of people who are now here, who are Nigerian, are highly educated. And I think even the research supports that it's a very highly educated group, particularly, Africans in general, but even Nigerians, if we were to focus on a group, Ghanaians as well.
That's true. That is true. And we should be very proud. So now we've left Nigeria and you're here. It's cold, but you came to stay with your family, which was beautiful because most of the time people come and they really don't even know where they're going. And so they really try to just, wing it. So in your case, you came and you had a community. And I remember one of our guests saying that is the key to come and be part of a community. So tell us about that.
Our situation was it was really a blessed situation. So funny enough, when my dad, he came 2 months before me, my mom, and my two older siblings came. So he actually, I think he went to Rhode Island first, and he was connected with one of his friends in Rhode Island who actually suggested that he go to Minnesota because there was more opportunities, better jobs, etc., and better place to raise a family. And so he then went to Minnesota, not knowing anybody, but the friend that he met with in Rhode Island connected him with someone in Minnesota. And so that connection, their family, essentially took us in for a few months when we moved to Minnesota. And yeah, the community, I think, was so helpful because there was like a built-in church community. There was a built-in Nigerian community, and in Minnesota, there's quite a bit of immigrants and African immigrants. That is, there's obviously like the East Africans, like there's a large Somali community and things, but there's also like a relatively large Nigerian community that I think people don't know of. And so we were connected into that community right away. They helped in terms of figuring out jobs and things that like my dad and my mom could do, but also just like having like kids that you grew up with who grew up in the same sort of way, same type of household and things like that. So yeah, I do think it was helpful. I was quite young, so for me it was just like it was just everyone I was meeting was like people that had a role to play in my upbringing. But yeah, I do think having that built-in community right away was helpful for us.
Yeah, that is so important. And I think that's one advantage, in my opinion, that those who are now coming into the US really have over us, those who came a little earlier. Because then you're in town, you have no one, you don't know anybody, you can't just tap into a community since you won't know anyone to introduce you to that community. So, and I think because of that, we have a few things that, at least for me, I wish I had done differently. So now you're now in this community and you love our food in the United States, right?
Oh yes. I think food is if you talk with anyone who knows me, they say, "Oh, Tiwa loves food." So it's true. But I think when we first moved to the US, funny enough, I don't think I was enamored with like the US, like American food at the time. As a young kid, I remember we were living with the host family that took us in, and I think we had pizza for like there was a couple of times we had pizza, and I was like, oh man, this is nasty. Like I couldn't, it wasn't something that like was appealing. But I later, now if you were to ask me like, what's your favorite food or one of your favorite foods, and I'll say it's pizza. But at the time, it's like, I don't even know what this is. It has cheese on it. It has all types of other stuff, and then there's bread at the bottom. It didn't make sense, but um, you know, it just speaks to how over time our taste buds and things like that just change. And now, if you were to ask me like, oh, I love pizza and can eat it anytime.
I just hope you didn't tell Americans that out loud, right? You have not told the story to Americans because this is something they can fight over. Just like we fight over jollof rice with Ghanaians.
Jollof rice, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're in America, so you don't like pizza? Excuse me? Especially if you've been to college in this country. I mean, that's what you eat, right? In college.
I mean, you eat pizza. Children just love pizza generally.
Yeah, it has everything.
So it has everything that you want. But I guess for some reason at the time, there were so many things going on too. I think the food was a little different. Then we came during a very cold season. It was a winter of winter of 1995, 96 in Minnesota. It was one of the worst winters in history. Wow. And I just remember the shock of like the cold weather and seeing your breath in the air. And it's like what is going on? Like, it's like we're living in a freezer.
Yes, exactly.
But all of those things were, we were met by a very good host family, and they're still good friends of our family today, and they really helped make things good. So
tell us about school. You went to primary school. What's the other one? Middle school, high school. What did you take out of all of that in terms of friendships and maybe some good experiences or maybe not so good?
Yeah, I would say so. I started in the school system. I went to preschool first, which there's an early education preschool program called Head Start. And so it's for sort of lower income individuals. And I think that was like my first sort of educational experience in the US. And, I'm a big advocate for Head Start. I know there's been some policies and things like to try to remove it, but I think it was very helpful. And then from there, I went to kindergarten and then through first grade, second grade, etc., all the way through 12th grade. And I would say that generally my experience was pretty good. I didn't know any different. So it wasn't like I did go to school in Nigeria, but it was like for like a year, as like a 3-year-old. But, I would say that like overall it was really good here. I grew up in the Twin Cities, and so very multicultural, had friends from all over. I had white friends, African-American friends, Asian friends. There's a large sort of community in Minnesota. So, I had friends from all over. And so for me, that was impactful in the sense that it changed or it helped sort of create a lens that I have even now about the importance of, multicultural aspects of things, right? Like, the importance of diversity and things of that nature and seeing the world outside of one's own perspective and lens. And so that was helpful in that way. I think some of the more challenging things were probably early on when we arrived, maybe a few years after we arrived. I remember in kindergarten or first grade, I was like bullied. There was one bullying experience that I remember where, a kid made fun of like the clothes that I was wearing. And I remember specifically one time I was wearing like pink and, I didn't know the difference or knew any, yeah, it was like, coming from Nigeria, it's like anybody wears any color, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I didn't know there were sort of some gendered expectations about what to wear and what not to wear. And, we were just given clothes, right? Like, it's like, okay, many families came by and gave us clothes. And so like, I just wore what my parents wanted me to wear, what was available to me. And so, some of those things were a little challenging, but, over time, the longer you're in the States, the more you understand, okay, it's probably best I don't wear something like this or I wear this or, you kind of, you know what to do and how to better navigate social situations.
You know what? I didn't know anything about that pink too, about men. Oh, I went to an event and I saw this person probably visiting from Nigeria in this bright pink. And it's an agbada, right?
Oh, yeah. Now I wear pink all the time. Like,
really?
Yeah, I have like 2 or 3 different pink shirts, and it's different as a kid, as a child, it's a little different. But then when you're older, it's like, okay, it's like more confidence. Like someone who can wear pink is like, okay, he's very confident. But as a kid, it's like, what are you doing wearing pink?
And then things have changed a lot since then. Anyway,
definitely, a lot has changed.
So, Dr. Ajibewa, I'm usually interested in the fact that people come, they go to school and they've been exposed to so much, and then they narrow the focus to something in terms of what their life work will be. What has prompted you to look into actually do what you do in terms of the research you've taken upon and where you are today?
I think a lot of things. So just to make sure we're all at the same sort of understanding, the work that I do really is focused on getting people to move more. And so I am trained as a kinesiologist, so someone who studies physical activity and exercise and tries to use physical activity as a means of combating and reducing the risk that comes with cardiovascular disease. And so what has really led me to this work is a few different things. One, I've always been highly involved in sports and from a young age, I ran track since like junior high into college. I, was always playing basketball with my older brothers. I would play football as a kid. I actually played like American football, and at first my parents were really scared. They're like, Tiwa, you can't play this game. It's too violent, but
It is.
but over time, they came around to it. But so sports was always part of like my growing up. At the same time, my dad had he had high blood pressure, and so that was something that like was, I think, came to my awareness very early. My mom is a nurse, and so she would make sure that like the food we were eating, the things we were doing were in a healthy manner, right? And so then he had a stroke in about 13, 14 years ago, which also kind of changed the dynamics of the family, which
I'm sorry.
shifted yes, thank you very much. But that shifted my interest to not only just study exercise or be interested in exercise, but also cardiovascular disease. And then as someone who, first generation or 1.5 generation immigrant, I'm interested in immigrant work, right? But also being someone who's Black in the U.S., right? Um, I'm also interested in issues of Black people across the diaspora. And so, all of that together is really sort of what has shaped my lens in terms of research and also made me ask more questions as to why we see the patterns of disparities that we see across diseases like cardiovascular disease or heart disease, I should say. So yeah, all of that together has really shaped my research.
So where are you now in terms of your studies? We back in Nigeria, I actually think we have more opportunities to move around. You have people send you to the market, send you to take the bus. But here, especially when you live in the suburbs, you don't even have buses to come around, so you've got to drive.
Yeah.
But then we have all the fitness centers that you can go into. You have parks that you can walk through if you wish. So my concern is that, are we ever going to get to the point where we get Black people to actually move the way we should just to benefit our health? I think I was quite surprised by what you told me. You said that Africans, those who came from Africa, we don't exercise as well as the Caribbeans, Blacks from the Caribbeans. And then those from the Caribbeans do not exercise as well as those as African Americans. And then, of course, all of us don't even come close to how the white population take exercise seriously. How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, what you were alluding to is actually a paper that we just published using data from a nationally representative data set. Yeah, it's a good question in the sense that how do we bridge the gap? I think part of the issue is that the living areas that in places where people live just hasn't been conducive to enhancing or incentivizing or in any way trying to promote physical activity. So you mentioned even among Africans back in the continent, there's more opportunities to be physically active. And you bring up a very good point, like the way that our cities are set up in the US, in many cities, not all, but many, it's not conducive to walking. It's not conducive to active transportation, whether that's biking or otherwise. And so we have to really think about how can we, as a society, as a nation, but also as people, whether it's African immigrants or Caribbean immigrants or anyone else, can find ways to increase our activity. So it could be simply, taking the bus. Taking the bus is going to force you at least to walk to the bus station, walk from the station or pickup spot to your office or wherever else. Or if, you don't have much transportation in that sense, finding ways to park, say you're going to the grocery store, park away from the building and, and walk more steps, or finding ways to just, if you live in a safe neighborhood environment, an environment that you're comfortable in, making walking a habit. Or if you can't even do that, like, I know we spoke a little bit about gardening, finding ways to garden and to do more quote unquote domestic activities, right? Like in the domain of domestic activities. So gardening, things like mowing your lawn, all of those things is going to force you to move your body a bit more and to be less sedentary or inactive. So those are just things that we can do at an individual level, but there's also things that need to be done at a systemic level too.
We love to dance, right?
Oh yes, that's yes. This reminds me of our conversation of even like, you know, I go to weddings. Nigerian weddings are just notorious, and just like African weddings in general, notorious for dancing. I mean, I think about some of my East African friends, they're dancing a lot. A lot of West Africans are dancing a lot. Caribbean, we love to dance, and I think that's something that we can definitely try to include more. And even in churches too, right? Like Thanksgiving services, we're dancing
Yes.
and doing all that. So dancing is definitely one way to be physically active.
Man, yeah, I think that would be a beautiful way. And we've done that for years. And most of the time, what I always wonder though, is that when we do what we love to do, especially when we do what we love to do, because we have a reason to do that.
Mm.
I know that my work on breast cancer actually came about because my boss died of breast cancer, right?
Mm.
And before she died, she said, for me, this work must not die.
Yeah.
It's very important. That was actually the last thing she said to me. And
Oh,
then
wow.
she died that night. Held on to that like, oh my God, this is important. I'm so glad that your dad survived, and we're grateful to God for that.
Yeah.
Because to now hold on to that and make that part of your life's work, it's really important, and it's really a blessing to our community, because we need that. We know that a lot is happening in our community, and we must do a lot to impact that. So is there anything that we should look out for in terms of how we can work with you, or how people can work with your research to also better their communities?
Yeah, I think, promoting physical activity in our communities is probably the most important thing. So that's within your families, that's at an individual level. In terms of my work, I'm really at the start of my career as an independent scientist. And so I'll be doing a lot of work, some intervention work, hopefully in the near future, and some other work really to understand and to better able to describe some of the issues
to our audience. Thank you for listening to our podcast on immigrants' desires to come to America and their dilemmas while staying in America. We hope this episode has been helpful and informative. Remember, adapting to a new culture can be difficult. With the right guidance and support, it is possible. We want you to share our podcast. We also want you to call us or go on our website, desireddilemma.com, for more episodes. Thank you so much for being with us today and have a wonderful rest of your day.